Makes it sound so serious. So I think that's why they put me first, so you can get over hearing about death. That's the very first thing. The book's called Knocking on Heaven's Door, and it explores the fact that my parents both lived very good lives and expected to die good deaths as well, and one of them succeeded and one failed. And the one who failed was my father, because my parents went along with everything organized medicine suggested for him, which led to him getting a pacemaker after he'd had a major stroke, and therefore having a very, very prolonged and quietly agonizing dying. And my mother was a rebel from day one. She looked like a housewife. She was elegantly dressed. But she was always a very non-conventional woman. She was an artist of an amateur type. And she knew her own mind. So, after my father's death, she developed 2 leaky heart valves, and she was 84. I took her to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston because they were like the Uber people for doing late life open heart surgery. And she grilled the surgeon who came into the room. And when he said, "Why are we here?" she said, "To ask questions." And he told her she had a 50-50 chance of dying within 2 years if she did not get the surgery, and a good chance of living to be 90 if she did get it. She asked him to let her go if she had a stroke during the surgery. And he said, "Well, what about just a minor stroke, a little weakness on one side?" And since she'd taken care of a guy who'd had a stroke for 6.5 years pretty much non-stop, this was really not the answer she wanted. She even at this point had a "do not resuscitate" bracelet on her ankle, and she showed him that too, and he was quite horrified. So I'm going to read to you about her last days. So the chapter is called "Old Plum Tree, Bent and Gnarled." My mother spent her last spring and summer arranging house repairs and throwing out the files for the book my father never finished writing. She told someone she didn't want to leave a mess for her kids. My mother's heart nurse called me, urging me to get my mother to reconsider surgery. Uneasy, I called the family doctor, Dr. Fales. "I know your mother well enough and I respect her," he said. "She doesn't want to risk a surgery that could leave her debilitated or bound for a nursing home. I think I would make the same decision if it was my mom." I called my mother and said, "Are you sure? The surgeon said you could live to be 90. "I don't want to live to be 90, she said. "I am going to miss you," I said, weeping. "You are not only my mother, you are my friend." That August, she had a heart attack, and I got a call from a new team of cardiologists who'd been handed my mother's case in the hospital. The desire of doctors not to give up on my mother, to resist death, and to show their caring by doing something, anything, seemed unstoppable. They were considering giving her the coronary artery bypass grafts plus the valve replacement surgeries she rejected. I feared she was headed down the greased chute towards a series of Hail Mary surgeries, risky, painful, dangerous, and harrowing, each one increasing the chance that her death, when it came, would take place in intensive care. More than a third of Medicare patients have surgery in their last year of life, and a fifth do die in intensive care. Burning with anger, I told the astonished cardiologist that my mother had rejected surgery before her heart attack, and I saw no reason to subject her to it now. My intimate, intuitive revulsion, I would later discover, had a basis in medical evidence. A major study found that 13% of patients over 80 who underwent the surgeries my mother was signing up for died in the hospital. In a smaller, confirming study, 13% died in the hospital, and an additional 40% were discharged to nursing homes. I called my mother in her hospital bed. "I think we're grasping at straws," she said, finishing my sentence. She was quiet. "It's hard," she said, "to give up hope." 4 hours later, she called me back. "I want you to give my sewing machine to a woman who really sews," she said. "It's a Bernina. They don't make them like this anymore. It's all metal. There's no plastic parts." "But I'd like it," I said. "But Katy," she said, "you don't sew." And I had to say, she was right. "I'm ready to die," she said. "I'm at peace with all my children." She was overflowing. She told me she'd found a little spiral-bound notebook that I'd made her for her 80th birthday. "It was so loving," she said, "and oh, Katy, I didn't appreciate it." "Cherish Brian," she went on. "Brian is my long-term partner, he's back in the back there. And you mean stop being ambivalent and cherish Brian?" I asked. "That's exactly what I mean. I love Brian. I love Brian for what he's done for you." An old Zen master once wrote, "Old plum tree, bent and gnarled, all at once opens 1 blossom, 2 blossoms, 3, 4, 5 blossoms, uncountable blossoms, whirling, changing into wind, wild rain, falling like snow all over the earth." My mother was like that. My brother Jonathan brought her home from the hospital with a portable oxygen tank. She could no longer walk upstairs on her own without fainting. A week later, Jonathan flew back to his truck driving job, and my other brother Michael, who'd actually been long estranged from my mother, further renouncing decades of self-protection, flew in, while I stayed in California and kept writing. She updated her will. She copied out a line from Helen Keller on a 3x5 card. "The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart." A hospice nurse cut off her long, beautiful white hair because she was now too weak to shower or wash it on her own. She needed someone there all the time. She needed me. But she did not say, "I need you." And like a fool, or a workaholic, or a human being in denial, I did not have the sense to simply go. My mother watched a moth emerge from a chrysalis and took her last photograph of its wet, crumpled wings. She took out her calligraphy pens and brushed out her final circular enso, it's a Japanese calligraphy, and wrote underneath it, "For my memorial service." Sitting under the fig tree in my California garden, I felt something descend from the sky and pour through me like grace. "Your mother is dying," said a voice inside my heart. "This is a sacred time." I decided to abandon my nearly finished article and fly to Connecticut. The phone rang. It was my brother, Michael, calling from my mother's house. He wanted more time alone with her, and she, he said, wanted it too. I deferred to my brother, ignored my heart, and pushed back my flight. The next night, she could not stop vomiting. She was taken to the hospital with Michael following the ambulance in her white Camry. "Don't call your siblings," she told him when they got to the hospice unit. "They'll only panic and come." She told the hospice nurses that she wanted to stop eating and drinking, that she wanted to die and never go home. She had dry heaves and could not catch her breath. She took off her hammered silver earrings and said, "I want to get rid of all the garbage," which I think was her way of saying, naked we came into this world and naked we will return. She told Michael to call my other brother Jonathan and me in California. By the time he came back from the phone, she was dead. He broke into sobs. It could have been too much self-administered morphine or too little potassium. It could have been the stress of a cardiac catheterization. It could have been getting up and making martinis for people who had stopped by to visit her. In the end, does it matter? She died of old age, sickness, and death. She died of a heart calcified and broken by 6 years of non-stop caregiving. She died of being 84. She was continent and lucid to her end. She took back her body from her doctors. She died the death she chose, not the death that anyone else had in mind. She reclaimed her moral authority from the broken medical system that had kept her husband hostage. She died like a warrior. Her death was painful, messy, and imperfect, but that is the uncontrollable nature of dying. My brother, Jonathan, called it a triumph.